So we're going to endeavour to keep this session to 1 hour in respect of everyone's night needs. We've got a lot to pack into this hour. Our focus tonight is on ethics and principles in permaculture. So we'll be talking a bit about what that means in the context of a PDC, and we'll be showing some of the many varied and exciting ways that you can teach ethics and principles in your PDC, in your intro to permaculture, in your sustainability workshops, all that sort of thing. Rowe's got a few ways, Greta's got a few ways, I've got a few ways, but also I'm sure there's a few ways in the room that we'll hopefully have time to hear about as well at the end. What are you thinking, Rowe?
Well, I'm thinking just a little bit about the history of the ethics.
Sure.
And it's really good as teachers just to know your history. So the first ethic, which we now know what ethics are, don't we? Because we all did it this morning. So please write down the definition in 50 words. No, not at this time of night. So it's care of the earth comes first. Why would that be? And why is it care of the earth and not care for the earth? Why is that language difference important?
It's an active motion.
Beg pardon?
Caring of is an active motion, caring for implies no action.
Yes, that's right. I hadn't thought of that before, and it's very useful. So taking care of is very different. You can sit and care for and still do a lot of destruction. You think it's all beautiful while you throw plastic bags in the sea. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And for possibly indicates that she's in not any way able to take care of herself as well, the earth. You know, if you're caring for it in place of it caring for itself.
Yeah. Okay, so care of has an active nurturing function and responsibility, yeah. And then care of people is the same thing. And of course we shorten it to earth care, people care, and then we go to fair share. Who knows the original wording of fair share? What was the original wording? That someone might ask you, students always ask you what ethics are. You will be asked. But what was the original wording of... Yeah, I think if you go back and look through the literature, it is redistribute surplus to need. And remember, we spend a lot of time talking about meeting needs in design. And the other thing we talk about, of course, is function. So needs and needs analysis is a lot of what we do before we work. So this is distributing surplus to need, and more recently it has been reduced consumption. And your students very often like to say they must reduce their number of children. So you find a switch in your course to people saying it's their fault for having too many children. However, does anyone know the ratio of consumption of a European child and what it costs to get them 10 years old compared with the child picking up papers on the tip or selling water in bottles in Delhi? So who needs to reduce consumption is a really big question, and ultimately consumption is probably more definitive than total population, and people don't like this. They like to think it's their fault for having a big population. In effect, I think the population now is starting to decrease worldwide and will decrease from now on. So years ago I learnt that Japan was a major threat with 80 million people. Now they're struggling to reproduce themselves. So a couple of generations is all that's required if women are educated and people have the choice of family planning. It just starts to come down like that. So refuting that inherent racism, if only there weren't so many of them, then we'd be all right, is one of your jobs, however you like to do it. Mm-hmm. So they're your ethics and they're universal. Then Greta, would you like, Brenna, maybe you'd like to talk to the principles? Brenna? Greta?
Brenna, do you have an alter ego?
So in the Wollongong course last month, I was Greta for the whole course. And then in
Most of Portugal, I was Brenna.
And we were all wondering what would happen when we were both on the same course with Rowe. And you seem to have mostly sorted it out. Principles. So what role do the principles play? Why are they important?
I think they're great guideposts for whenever you come up against a conundrum.
Pretty much what I was trying to say. They're pretty good landmarks and pointers. They summarise at least some of the thinking and help to point us towards some strategies.
So we've heard guideposts, they're landmarks. Something else we want to add?
Applicable across many places.
Yes.
Context, social, environmental.
So our ethics are our deeply held personal beliefs, and our principles take this a step forward. They're generally considered universal directives. How universal that is can be debated, but generally, these are things that can be applicable. Produce no waste or design from patterns to details are things that are generally universally held to be true. And the principles and ethics crucially work together. There's an exercise that someone did at a permaculture convergence a few years back where if you're from a big fossil fuel company, you could show how you're using each of the permaculture principles so beautifully in your work. And people went, oh no, everything we've ever believed in is wrong. Permaculture's bunk. Let's cancel permaculture. And someone pointed out, no, they're not thinking of the ethics. If they were thinking of the ethics with the principles together as a pair, they wouldn't be able to greenwash their company. So we're always holding them both together.
There's a holistic framework as well. The principles can't work in singularity. They have to work together. The more the better.
I like to think of them as a framework through which you see the world and decisions.
I think it isn't possible. It's probably not possible to think of an exception to a really good principle. So a principle such as catch and store energy applies from the poles to the equator to the desert and everywhere. So you can say it's a universal, it's a global. And therefore how you do that comes down to the next level, which is
Strategies. I know what I'm...
However, at the moment, a lot of people are talking about David's principles, and David has 12, but there was a set developed by Bill a lot earlier, and some people still like to work very closely with Bill's principles because they're memorable. And many of them guide people because they occupy their brain a bit, so it might be work where it counts. You find yourself doing something thinking, hang on, this doesn't count, I don't want to be doing this. I want to make a difference. So there are the principles, and in some cases they overlap. An exercise for you might be, are you going to do it? Bill's, David's, and people just see which are common to both. There's nothing sacred about 12 principles in any way whatsoever. In effect, we now have one called Principle Zero, which is consideration for the land and Indigenous people who lived there before you even observe and interact. Find out first about Indigenous living and the shape of the land and what happened to it. So there are now 13. It's quite interesting because David's read my book before it even went to print, and he made no comment about that. Now there's Delvin in America who's worked out there are 138 principles, and they're a bit too many to remember. And he's finding more every day. So, yeah, and he'll send you a pack of things with them all in. So what we need is students aware that there are principles we can use in design. Some of them are attitudinal, some of them actually are where to start, and some of them are universal. And you can sort them any way you like. Your students don't have to know them all, they have to be aware of them and recognise them. Because in learning, you're either teaching so they know how to identify a contour line, and awareness isn't good enough, or awareness of something, such awareness of the principles, and then see what series you'd like to work with. So this evening, as soon as we've done strategies and techniques, we'd like to take you through 2 ways of doing this. And then you can choose your own way, and there are many ways of bringing students to awareness of the principles. Okay. Strategies?
I thought you were asking me a question before, not segueing beautifully into strategies. Apologies, it's hard to tell. Or talking to Greta, I mean, you can never tell.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at sort of an inverted pyramid is the way that I like to look at it. We have ethics as being super important. Well, let's put ethics on the bottom, sorry. We'll have them as a foundation. And then our principles are what we move to next, and they work together. And then the next tier is strategies. Our strategies are bioregional solutions. What might be an example of a strategy?
The life ways of your local Indigenous people.
The life ways?
Yeah, as in like, but just going back to Principle Zero, I always thought that like that's that bioregion is sort of what you need to ground yourself in.
Yeah, so to name that as a strategy, Indigenous knowledge or Indigenous knowledges would be a strategy.
It's very, obviously, like, not to reduce it to that as a category, but like...
It's a great example though. Thank you. Pat?
When you talk about capturing and storing like water, kind of how that's done, if it's high altitude low country, high altitude cold country versus low altitude hot country, you're going to do it in a different way.
Yeah, so here we've got our ethic might be earth care, our principle, depending what we're talking about, catch and store energy. And then Pat saying, okay, a strategy related to that would be storing water high up in the landscape. Slowing, spreading, sinking. Yeah, there's lots of examples of what a strategy, conserving water strategy. Let's take this a bit further. Techniques, local level. What are some examples of techniques if we're talking about catching, spreading and sinking water? Swale, wicking bed, Quinlan. What else? Leaky weirs, dams, water tanks, ponds, right?
And none of them individually are permaculture, as some people like.
Exactly.
To say.
Exactly. So there's you know, students to the PDC turn up on our first day, and what do we want to know about?
That reminds me of a joke that I consistently make. One of my parents consistently make is I've got a composting dummy at my place, and one time my parents came, they just didn't know what it was, and I was just like, "What's that really been doing out there?" And I was like, "Oh, that's permaculture." And I actually learned it's all in there. Why don't you guys go take a look? I didn't say that, and I was hoping that they were going to take a look. And now whenever my parents, like, whenever there's someone else around, and they're like, "What's happening over there?" My parents go, "Oh, it's permaculture."
That's permaculture. I like that. So techniques are really what grab our attention. They're the shiny things. What's the issue with teaching techniques as if they are permaculture? What's the risk of that?
It's not connected to the values of ethics. People can twist them in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
They're not universally applicable.
They're not universally applicable.
Dogma, like you have to do it this way.
Every place needs a herb spiral, or a flying herb spiral, which I'm going to ask you about later. I'm quite intrigued by that.
It might not be appropriate.
Yeah. So techniques being local are dependent on context. Let's think about the strategy of soil remediation or building soil. Let's say building soil as a strategy. What's something you would do at a huge broadacre farm scale to build soil?
Keep ground cover.
Yeah.
Chisel plough.
Chisel plough, key line, rotational grazing, keeping ground cover.
Possibly compost tea applications on my side.
Yep. Compost tea applications, fencing off waterways. Okay, what's something we would...
Seed drop.
Yeah, from the helicopter, as recommended by Rowe Morrow. Praying for rain, yes, dancing for rain. So let's bring it down to like a fair harvest scale. There's quite large gardens over there. What's something they could do at this scale? Compost, seaweed, cover cropping, tarping, yes, here we go. Biochar. And what about at your home, but you don't have a backyard, you've got a balcony? Worm farm. What was that? Bakashi. Yeah, wicking pot. Yes, weeing on your one poor lemon tree, but not too much. Oh yeah, great. Join your community garden, community composting. So techniques rely on that context. They're very local. Swales don't belong everywhere, but they're great in their certain context. But we're remembering swales are a technique that relates to water infiltration, the strategy.
Do you remember Dermot from the other young fella from the PTC that I was on in Maine? Dermot? He and I had this great conversation about putting swales into his parents' like front yard, like as in like in like the Perth Hills, which was like, you know, quarter acre block, not small, but like he just said the same. It's such a steep, like rocky, like hillside. Do you reckon swales would help? And I was like, oh yeah. And we just like had this whole conversation.
So the neighbours say, "What's that?" Oh, that's permaculture. Anything to add, Rowe?
No, I think that's pretty right, but students love techniques very, very much, and you have to be careful not to get stuck on teaching techniques instead of what's appropriate. So see if you can stay at what's called another order, which may be at least your biome or within your really your climatic zone. So temperate zones everywhere from the Mediterranean to Chile to southern Africa to Western Australia, they all can probably deal with similar strategies. And then you get home and you've got techniques. So be very, very careful about promoting a technique as an absolute strategy or principle.
Anything else there? I think that one reason people hook onto techniques is because they're concrete. They can put their hands on them, they can see them. People who are meeting permaculture for the first time often become overwhelmed by the conceptual stuff. And it's a bit hard to get your head around that. And I wonder if that's why people go away remembering the techniques and some of the strategies, but not necessarily understanding how they get into the overarching things. Just an idea.
That's great. Thinking about how people want answers to questions. And someone who's there to ask more questions. And that we as permaculturists often don't know the answer. Instead of asking questions.
So what would you think of a course where 3 days of the 12 was devoted to swales? And that's what happens when it gets out of proportion. You ran into that, didn't you?
Yeah, teaching this course in a place where only one person had been teaching PDCs, and so everyone had done their PDCs with one particular group. And so we had this session, and we had the previous session where we were talking about what are the core subjects, and everyone was going earthworks and swales, and we were having to say, well, not necessarily. And the jaws were on the ground, and I was saying no, and the people were getting very angry about the fact that earthworks and swales were a core topic of permaculture, and we had to have this very long and drawn-out discussion about its relevance and about understanding context and landscape and climate and learners, who the learners are in the group, and whether it's relevant for everyone. And we had the similar thing in Portugal with people wanting to do earthworks again, more earthworks and more dams in an area where there's other farmers going, we have way too much evaporation and not enough rainfall for it to make any sense for us to be storing water in dams.
Yeah. Open water is not a good idea in that climate at all. So all your dams and ponds then have to be changed to something which is deeper, in the ground, more protected and possibly covered. Going back to old Middle Eastern ways of doing things instead of the ways that we have received doing. Yeah.
And maybe that's one problem with there being so many teachers from Australia, or maybe it's more of a colonial mindset of this imposition of ideas and the imposition of agricultural practices or design without context.
Okay. So we talk about how to teach it. Greta, what do you think?
There's a few different ways, and I know that there are as many ways to teach principles as there are people in the room, and probably more. So we're going to just go through a couple of different options and throw out practically, and then also throw out a few more ideas. And then we're going to finish with one of Brenna's as So this is one way you could teach principles. This is a list of a mixture of Bill's principles, David's principles, and Bill's attitudinal principles. So we're going to hand this out, and if you'd like to talk to the person next to you about an example of that principle, or what it means to you, or an example of that principle. Do you mind taking one between two and seeing around the room we're going to get?
An example, like a strategy that would stem from it.
Yeah. Just one between two. Are they going to make it all the way? Yeah. That's not great.
So when a course develops 3 days, for example, on swales, that's called course drift. It's drifting according to some local bias, and you have to be really careful, keep bringing new people in to challenge what's happening on that site all the time to make sure it comes up to date. Okay.
Oh no, the white ones are getting taken out. That's okay, I'm sorry.
And that stuff tends to be tracked, for ahead of time. Workwear is always like this shirt.
Thank you. We're going to just take a couple of groups examples because we'd like to show a few different ways of teaching these principles in this way. So can one group please turn their principle around, read it out for everyone, and then give one or two examples that they spoke about or what it means to them.
We've got multi-function relative location, and we interpreted that as like a specific element on your site, trying to make it as multifunctional as possible, and in good relation, like efficient relation to the other elements.
For its multifunction. So the chook shed, that's got a few different functions and purposes going on. So you place the chook shed, say, next to your greenhouse, so the greenhouse gets some of the heat from the chickens, and you'd also put it near enough to the house that you can access the eggs, near enough to the veggie patch so you can put the veggie scraps into the chickens. That's what we guess that thing was about. I haven't actually come across that before.
We're sort of guessing it was in the design process is probably where this is actually used.
Yeah, that's one of Bill's original sets.
Yeah.
Thank you. Who else would like to share theirs?
We've got show you the edges and marginal, and straight away Jill and I both went to the same place with this. As opposed to using it in its physical context, as in like a fence line and those edges, we're actually talking about the people that
do get marginalised or choose to be marginalised, and the knowledge and the value that they can contribute to minute societies and bigger societies because of their point of view.
People in minority groups who've had to deal with a whole set of different circumstances for living and surviving than what Mr. and Mrs. Average are used to, and using that as a resource for new sources of wisdom.
I'm jumping into this one because I haven't even got on this one, but this is everyone's back up your major functions. I guess this like relates to disasters where you're like deprived from your major functions, but you could also just use it in a more like everyday resilience kind of way, like consider like, well, like this is part of a disaster, but like consider not wanting to go into the hospital during COVID. Like I had a friend who engaged really seriously with diet and to a certain extent herbalism for the first time in his life because he had really severe asthma and didn't want to go to the hospital for any reason in the last like 18 months. And so that was him backing up his major function of just wellness, like maintaining his own wellness.
Thanks. Another way we could do this session, we could continue going around and around and around. You might ask for an ecological and a social example of each principle. One I particularly like is in a teacher training space is asking about the permaculture principles applied in education, which is a really nice way. If you're really familiar with ecological and social applications, and it's nice to really start thinking about the ways in which we can apply them in our education system as well. Another way we could do this exercise would be to walk around the site and people have their principle and they go and find an example and then come back and share that with everyone and go, look, this is where I can see catching, storing energy here already happening. This is where I can see someone who's backed up their major function because they have downwater, they have rainwater and they have townwater. Would you, I don't know, we can move on to a different way?
Yeah, I think we can. Just Meg McGowan was head of the fraud squad in New South Wales, and when she was training young officers in fraud, she'd bring them to her place and she would put all the principles up and they had to learn about backup major functions, value the edges, value the marginal, work where it counts, and then say how it could apply to their work in fraud. Similarly, I've seen someone else do it in museums. We can do it and work with refugees. You can take that whole list and just run out examples if you're working in special situations where you can run examples through for your principles. And they work for almost everything. Yep, okay.
Another way we could do it is to have a whole series of pictures on the floor. This is how Rowe normally teaches it. Would you like to explain them?
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't bring them this time, but I just get a whole lot of pictures from National Geographic, and everyone has to match a picture with a principle and then say why it speaks to them. And people make the most unlikely connections. But it's really, really good and effective. Okay? Okay, now with this one, we'll just, here's a different way. You care of people and care of the earth and redistribute surplus to need. We'll move them a bit. Now, what is really interesting, if you take your principle and go and apply it either between or among two of those. So you can put it for one or you can put it for two and just say why you think it fits. So just try that. Pick up your principle and go and say where you think it fits. Some are obvious, some are not.
So tell us about it.
I guess reduce consumption, I thought we'd reduce no waste. And also with the catch and store energy, we're getting a lot more of that from the sun than we're getting the rest of it from other means.
Thank you. Let's hear some more reasons why you put them there.
Or in between. Yeah. In between. Yeah.
Wait for the Greta.
It's best to do what I say.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think it's more clearly there.
Yeah.
No. We all got our own ones.
So is there any particular weighting of them that you can see that is working or not working in the syllabus and in the principles?
There seems to be a lot between earth care and people care.
Yeah, and that's true. That's probably where most of the thing is. So we'd like to hear some more reasons why you put them where they are. Let's hear.
I put energy cycling closer to reduce consumption and redistribute, but still between the other two because it can be applied in a social way, but also in terms of human energy. So the energy that we create, the effort that we put in, but also the energy that's created through the systems that we generate, whether that's electricity, self-generation, or using natural systems that are closed-loop processes. So nitrogen fixing cover crops and then returning them to the soil and then collecting the seed and continuing the cycle.
Let's hear from someone else. Wayne, what did you do?
Well, I went in the middle. I mean, in the spirit of integration, we had some wise words earlier about integrating minority groups into the fold when we're working, and certainly integrating people into earth care and not seeing ourselves as separate from that. But integration also speaks to efficiency of design and systems and resource use, which is feeding directly into reducing consumption.
Someone else?
But the yield of the system is theoretically unlimited, pretty close to fair share, and I think that's normally thought of in terms of what it can do for humans, so it's a bit on the yield care side as well.
We're probably a bit low on distribute surplus to need, and I think that part of the syllabus of permaculture could be strengthened quite a lot. And there's a lot of stuff coming out in modern ethical money and donut economics and things that we need to bring into that part to make sure that resources are more equally distributed and conserved. Okay, who's seen them done?
I'm just wondering if anyone still has some, because I think it would be really helpful for everyone to just... Anyone else have one more?
Okay, yes, please.
That's all right. You don't have to put anywhere either. But just so we can all see.
Edge effects probably here because it's a hard one, not all three, but edge effects is about two systems meeting and being more efficient together than apart. So, yeah.
Are they all there? Those of you who know them, the ones you've used most regularly? Can people tell me whether they can see the one about think in terms of solutions? What do we call that? The solution? Yeah. Oh, you... Right, because a lot of people get into negative downward spiral thinking and keep telling you the problem, and if you're thinking permaculture, you're trying to think of a solution all the time, and it will change the way you think. Yeah, let's hear.
This one's apply self-regulation and accept feedback and creatively use and respond to change.
I was wondering where apply self-regulation and accept feedback is. We've had obtained a yield, and I thought, can we put it closer over to fair share? And I thought, that's more when it gets checked by self-regulation and feedback.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that one's really good in the middle. Relates to all three.
So they're rather abstract. It's important for your students to have examples, because some people think abstract and some think concrete. So at each stage you try to think, here's an example, or can you give me an example? And that will improve their learning, and then you bring them back later. Okay, who's seen another way of doing it? Other ways. There are lots and lots of ways.
I've got Rowe and Playfield's principles set. Yeah, and that has pictures that you can match. It's got ethics and principles in it. It's got a mind map of each of them. It's got maybe 4 things that can match up. I've never mapped. I've never looked at them. I think I do it differently every time.
I did one where we did one per day, like we looked at them all briefly on the first day, and then each day we focused on one. And we listened to Charlie's songs and explored it in a social context and unpacked them on each day.
We've done a little, we've done a little, came up with an action for each one, and then we had, so that we could remember them across the whole of the 10 days of the PTT. We had to reenact the. Judy will remember.
Yeah, I don't remember how we done.
Yeah, we had to activity. Yeah, but it was just a good way to embed the actual, so people actually remember, because they're very overwhelming to remember. So yeah.
So in your first lesson, they don't have to remember, just a week.
Yeah. But it was kind of fun.
Sounds good. Yeah. I've got a strategy for memorising them as well. I did an activity at a maker market where we made Lucasa, like it's normally a piece of wood with beads or shells on it, and there's data coded into each thing that you put on there, each physical thing. So it's a bit like reading Braille, and it's like a sort of like a location-based map, but it's in a palm-sized thing, and you can put any amount of information into it by telling yourself that.
Memory palace.
Yeah, and so I made one for the principals and put some little upcycled beads and glued them onto pieces of cardboard.
Look at all the perma nerds in the room salivating about that idea. That's great.
Can I share one that I've tried before? I don't teach.
We stand up to so people can see it.
I don't teach this class, but I've used the lovely cards that Brenna and Charlie put together in a full day workshop with a different subject, but linking to permaculture. And I just invited everyone to grab one card and take it with us when we went on to a few activities. And then I was encouraging people when a principle just sort of emerged out of the other content to sort of and sort of like interrupt the class and be like, oh, this could be a principle. And it was just an example of when it wasn't a pure focus on permaculture, but then everyone got one principle in that day workshop.
I played a bingo game similar, pre-set in a bingo card format. As we worked through the course, a little bingo.
I did something similar to that of laminated Congress image and put that as a placemat in the middle of the tables. And as I'm teaching the course that I'm doing, which is based on Living Smart, I ask people to put a sticky note next to each principle as they hear it or hear it referred to, and make a note on that post-it note what it was that triggered them thinking about that principle. And the first to call out that they've heard all of them gets the privilege of sharing it that day.
Okay, well, you can be as innovative as you like. It's terrific. Stick them up around the room and leave them up for the whole time of the course. So that's good. So over to Brenna.
Okay. So the cards that Tamara mentioned, I'll show how one of the ways that we use them. If you take a card and pass it on, and keep passing them. If you've got 2 or 3 cards, that's okay.
And if someone feels like it, stick those round the room to tomorrow would be be a really nice thing to do. Thanks.
Keep passing, have to if you want.
Ah, work from pattern to Vita. No, I'm not going to do it. I think some of that stuff, there must have been a bee sting in it, but I'm having a big reaction.
Send it around again.
Mm.
Does it really hurt you?
It's very
It's very swollen.
Swollen and itchy, yeah.
That's why.
Mm?
And histamines. You got any knives? Did you put any?
No, I'll get it in a minute. Now let's
Your card. On it there is an image of a permaculture action. Many different kinds of permaculture actions. And on the back there is a formidable vegetable song lyric. And part of the background for this cards is when Charlie and I first started teaching school incursions, we realised that there's some of David's 12 principles that are a little wordy and difficult to explain in a short workshop context, or even in a 2-week PDC. Things like use and value renewable resources and services. And the 6-year-olds look at you like, what's that mean, miss? And so we actually worked with David over about 8 months to think up some more catchy versions of the principles. We don't need endless versions of principles in the world, but these were useful to us in our teaching, and they've been very useful in adult education as well, particularly short courses. So instead of use and value renewable resources and services, we've got go self-powered. And through trying it out over a couple of years, these were the ones that we landed on that seemed to have the desired effect. Design from patterns to details, we could just say be a designer, and it seemed to be clear enough. So David did work with us on these. After we'd come up, we made some tweaks with him, and there's a poster and there's cards. So as you're walking around, I'd invite you to look at the fine print on the principles and see if those new wordings of the principles resonate with you. The way we'll do this activity, and we'll just do a short version, is thinking about your image or thinking about the text on the back. Choose whichever resonates with you the most. I'd invite you to stand up, walk around. We've got Dave's 12 principles on the outside and the 3 ethics in the middle, and place your cards next to the principle or ethic that you feel it speaks to. And I'll give you a hint, there's no right or wrong answers. Some could be for any of them. So place it down and have a look at what other people are doing too. Whichever you like.
So finish with a body confession.
Yes, great. You right?
Yeah, I had some of that wax, beeswax. There's probably a sting in it. Been stung.
Oh no. It's the last thing you needed.
Talk anymore.
It's the last thing you needed. Ollie's got a cool snappy way to end that is related to principles, so we'll throw to him after this.
Terrific.
Yeah?
Yeah, he should do it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was trying to go get some antihistamine.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, I think there's a bee sting in it. It's in the cheek and it's just... Yeah, but it's not serious. Hmm? No, it doesn't matter. I'll swallow it next. Let's just do this. Not normally.
I didn't sit on the spot.
No, sorry.
And I just get
It
was really helpful.
I thought you had like tobacco or something you brought to the school stuck with you. Yes. It's really big in Portugal.
Choose a couple cards at random. Who had this card? What's going on in that card for those who can't see?
Someone is hanging their laundry on a hill's hoist while the sun is shining.
What principle did you put it next to, Pickles? Self-powered, yes, use and value renewable resources and services. Our favourite Holmgren principle, very Holmgrenian. Always a mouthful when you're quoting Holmgren. Why is it a great example of that principle? Renewables. Yeah, we're using the sun. Solar-powered clothes dryer. Pretty cool.
It's a cool story about that. Some guy was advertising in a magazine, like, solar powered clothes dryers, and like sent him, $20 or whatever, and they just sent him a rope.
Good on him. New cellulose-based packaging. It's a banana, the skin you peel off. I have a drawing about that, and someone from, I can't remember where, maybe Bangladesh, got in touch and said, I'm very interested in the new cellulose-based packaging you're marketing. It's like, you're just not getting the joke. Sorry, man. So this image of a solar-powered clothes dryer, what other principle would this fit well in? Catch and store energy. What else we got? Obtain a yield. What yield are we obtaining? Heat, light, dried clothes. An afternoon off.
Use biological disinfecting services.
Patterns to details. Why are we thinking that?
Don't put the pattern of weather that tells you where not to put your solar power.
That's pretty clever. Okay, what else do we have? Who had this one? Pat, what's going on here?
Having a 2-minute shower.
Person in the shower, every 7-year-old's favourite card. There's a nude person on there. This is a new deck, but the other one's all worn out at the edges. It always gets picked. Which principle did you place this next to?
I put it under
Self-regulation?
yes, but I didn't put it directly there. I wanted to put it next to waste not, want not.
Produce no waste. Brilliant, okay. Why is this a good example of produce no waste?
Is he putting the shower water onto the garden?
Could be using the grey water, yeah? Collecting the rainwater. What waste does a long shower create?
Wasted energy.
Yeah, so it's not just the water, but we're thinking upstream now. And with these cards, we've had lengthy rich class discussions about issues like this, which will be different kinds of discussions from in a PDC class, this kind of class, or a group of 6-year-olds out in the garden, or a weekend workshop at Nannup Flower and Garden Festival. But it can open up those sorts of discussions. What other kinds of waste? Oh, here's some that we're not really thinking of. What else could this card go next to? What other principle?
Creatively used in response to change. The hot water runs out.
Yeah.
2-minute shower.
Well, by the same token, apply self-regulation and accept the feedback. Yeah. The 2 minutes is up, my song is finished, I have to turn off the water. Whereas I've still got soap.
Has someone lived in a place with a rocket-powered hot water system, rocket stove-powered system, or some other low-tech? How long are your showers, Jasper? Abundance of rainwater, but... Oh, that's pretty nice. People care, yeah, we could place it next to the ethic.
2 minutes is a long time.
times 3, it's getting up there. All right, we'll do one more quickly. This one's next to creatively use and respond to change, which is quite a difficult principle for some people to get their heads around. And we had, whether it's hot or it's freezing, everything has its season. Who put that one down? If you remember. Yeah? And on the picture, what's happening?
People are in beanies.
Yes. They're all rugged up. Spot on, Gemma. You're doing a great job. She's still here. 5 minutes to go. People are all rugged up and they're standing next to a heater called Heat Blaster 5000 that's not plugged in.
So they're dressing appropriately so they don't need the heater.
Yeah. And whether it's hot or it's freezing, everything has its season. How does that relate well to creatively use and, was it patterns to detail?
There's such thing as bad weather, just the wrong outfit.
Oh, there you go. Dave Holmgren's partner Sue Dennett's a big proponent of this one. Just rug up. Toughen up and rug up, please. Stop complaining. Yeah. Inner undies. What else might this sort of example go next to? What's an out-of-the-box example? What's something that you think that doesn't go there? People rugging up.
Use edges and value the margin.
Yeah, why might that fit?
Because you can lose weight.
People care.
Value the margins of what the human body
can tolerate. It's got some Wim Hof fans in the house. One more strange one. Yeah? What are we thinking?
Wearing the right clothes for the weather means you can go out in, a blizzard and have the joy of that rather than being inside.
Oh. And a bit more money in the pocket if you're not paying for heating. Ah, I love that. Obtain a yield. Pat? Oh. What were you thinking? We'll back you up.
I was thinking on the lines of integrate rather than segregate as well. This is where you source your clothes from. Don't have to go mainstream.
Hey, the guinea pigs in the hut, in the Andes, and that was the heat, and there were dozens of them, and that works. Yeah. So. Oh, and be so cute. That wouldn't be distracting at all. So we've used these in this way. There's a whole bunch of ways. We've got a friend that uses them as tarot cards, Permaculture Principles Tarot, and she'll pick a principle and she'll pick a picture or a word and she'll relate them each day, and it's always a different combination, and she'll just contemplate compost toilets and produce no waste for the day. She's from Mullum. Yeah, go figure. We've got relays. We've done, you have a hand of 4 cards and you and 1 or 2 other people putting them down and picking up until you've got a hand of actions that you'll actually commit to. Yeah. So if you've already done ride your bike to work, put that down because you're cheating, okay? Get one that you're actually going to do.
That's why I couldn't take them off my fridge.
I've seen them stuck up in bathrooms all over Melbourne as share house art. Yes, permaculture principles, get them out there. And mainly we tried to make them versatile because that's what I like in teaching resources. But like Rowe said, doing this sort of activity can be done with some handwritten principles cards and a bunch of magazines, or literally the front covers of books can be used instead of the pictures that we've made.
We actually went back and added a few extras in the second print run for people care, because we found there were a lot of earth care examples, but not so many people care. It could be a little bit trickier to find examples for that. So.
And an interesting observation, when we're doing this with really young kids, we won't put the principles cards out if we're short on time. We'll just do a similar activity to this with the ethics. And children really understand fair share in a way that adults don't seem to remember. So fair share will be full of examples because they know what fair is and they know what sharing is. And it's given me a deeper understanding of what that ethic is really about. It's not just the add-on, it's really important. Was there anything else to add before we wrap up, Rowe and Greta?
I think I ate a bee sting tonight. So I'm not thinking so clearly. I can't think of anything else. Greta?
No, I think it's a really comprehensive session and it's a long day. Yeah. If anyone's interested in, at some point, thinking about permaculture principles applied in education spaces and how we can use them in our design of education spaces, that's not compulsory and there's not going to be a quiz about it, but I'm really interested to know. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately and it would be awesome to hear if anyone else has any ideas at some point.
What do you mean by education?
Yeah, so when we're running courses or when we're designing a course, how can we use the principles in our design? So for one of them, some examples for me would be when we're talking about course outcomes and we're teaching to outcomes, that's obtaining a yield. And the competencies that we measure in students are the yields that as educators we're obtaining through those sessions. It's the end of the day, it's really late. Ollie's going to wrap us up. What you got, Ollie?
Alright, everyone's going to stand up.
Yeah.
Make a nice sharp circle. You're not people behind other people and everyone's going to see each other. So now I'm just going to memory. So a little bit of body percussion. That'll be to help people memorise the principles. So let's wait for the painter. Everyone gets chest a bit of cut. So that's what I sound. Principle number 1, what is it? Observe and interact. Observe and interact. Observe and interact. Principle number 2, keep going. You can say principle number 2 while they're going there. Yeah. So Charlie's going to get out here. He's going to hold this half of the room. Say principle number 1. Observe. And what are you going to do? Observe. Can you guys do it? Creatively use and respond to change in the group. So that's a call to change and swap over. Okay, so we'll go catch and store energy, observe and interact. Charlie, you start them off. We'll do a count of 4. I'll start these guys off on observe and interact. Yeah. Catch and store energy. 1, 2, 3, 4. But all of them are in quarter note time, and then the six principles are in triplet time. And they're all in pairs of twos, except for creative views and respond to change, which is sort of used as a change one. So, yeah.
Can I just say that back in 2011, I heard this guy, Ollie Watkins, was writing rhythms about the permaculture principles, and that was what inspired me to write songs about permaculture.
That was awesome. I loved it.
Do you want another one?
Yes!
Right, so let's... It's a little bit more of a role. It's like, David Holman's so wordy. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So apply self-regulation and accept feedback. 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 Apply self-regulation and accept feedback.
Oh!